I know there are many of us who want to build our homes with mud and in an African indigenous way. And this video is for you and I. Here's a challenge. Since we both share this same goal, because I also want to build a mud house, why don't we push ourselves one step closer to making this goal a reality, especially in 2026? Today, I want you to take up the role of the Magini as we continue in the Tubali series. These are master builders of the Tubali from the Hausa community. They're not your typical architects, graduates, researchers, or PhD students. They're master builders of such high caliber beyond what modern education can recognize. While many regard building with mud as primitive, these master builders called Magini have mastered and perfected the engineering and science of understanding their micro and macroclimates, their soil, their communities, and themselves. They have designed mud architecture that has seen the sun rise over 600 years or more. So even though most of them are long gone, their spirit is alive in some of these buildings today, and they continue to defy the common narrative that building with mud is primitive. Our ancestors are literally resisting this narrative even as we speak today, by the mere fact that these structures are still alive today, like almost over 600 years, even though they're gone. And you and I have an opportunity to learn from their genius wisdom on how one can be one with the environment and build their own mad masterpiece that could hopefully maybe live, close to 600 years or even surpass this mark, to be honest. So, to anyone who says mad architecture is not durable, share with them this building series of the Tubali and let them see for themselves that that is a huge lie. As for you and me, we have some big shoes to fill today. But I'm not saying this to just intimidate you, but rather to get you excited and invigorated, because we honestly have a real opportunity of using this knowledge to make our dreams of building an indigenous African mud house a reality. Let's focus on learning three things today. Number one, a brief history of the Magini, their thought process on building a Tubali masterpiece, and then lastly, the role of the Magini in the community. If you're following along and maybe you're taking notes, feel free to grab a pen, and a notepad and take your notes for this next part. Now, let's start with the history of the Magini. The history of the Magini is linked to the rise of the Hausa city-states called Birane. These cities existed between the 11th and the 15th centuries, and they spread across what we now call Niger and Nigeria. For the right historical context, as we go through this series, I urge you to not look at the Hausa architecture as one from Niger or one from Nigeria. Just look at them as one, because these are truly one people, and applying the colonial border currently just distorts that history. Some of these Birane states we're talking about include Kano, Zaria, Katsina, and Agadez. And if you guys want to learn more about it, feel free to Google them just to get a little bit more context. But let's continue with the Magini. The Magini were traditionally organized into influential architects, and their status was compared to that of nobility. Remember, these were architects of emirs, palaces, also known as Gidan Saki, and the Great Mosque of Agadez in Niger. The introduction of Islam in the 14th century slightly influenced the Magini's role, and they began incorporating elements such as arched entrances and rib vaults, but they fully maintained the indigenous structural techniques. I want to emphasize this point because sometimes when people think of the arrival of Islam in the African continent, they think that it completely erased the indigenous way, and that's not even remotely true. During the era of Saki Muhammad Romfa in Kano in the 15th century, the Magini reached their highest state of innovation. They expanded what they call ganua, which are the massive city walls, and also developed a triple space, which is a compound layout that accommodates Islamic principles of privacy. Here's a quick question for you. Are there values that might impact the architecture design you want? For instance, we see here that the Islamic values that the Hausa community started to adopt impacted the Magini's choice to incorporate arched entrances and also ribbed vaults. That's something for you to just take a minute or two to just think about, especially as you think of your dream home. Now let's move to the mindset on and the philosophy of the Magini as they build a Tubali masterpiece. When a Magini approaches a site, their mindset is guided by three main principles. The first one is environmental symbiosis. The second one is Sutura, which also translates to privacy and protection. And then the third one is the structure, honesty, and ritual. As we cover these principles, it's important for you and I to equally think of at least, what are the top three principles that will guide and influence the mindset we take up during the design process and the building process of our mad houses. So as we go through these three principles, equally think through as you envision the Magini, how they're thinking about, for instance, the environmental symbiosis. What does that really translate to you? How does it challenge you to think of the principles that you're also going to employ while building? Let's start with the principle of the environmental symbiosis. The Magini do not view soil as dirt or a cheap substitute for stone. They see it as a living resource, and traditionally they call the soil Birji. Their mindset is one of thermal harmony, and they understand that thick mud walls are not just structural, but are breathing skins that regulate the extreme heat in their microclimates. These are serious scientists and researchers who understand weather patterns and continue to evolve their architecture as climatic conditions change over a long period of time. The second principle we're going to look at is the principle of Sutura, which translates to privacy and protection. This second principle explains why Hausa architecture is inward looking, and they prioritize what they call zaure, which is the entrance hall, as a transition point between the public world and the private family space that ensures the interior remains hidden from the street. The principle of Sutura really is centered on the Islamic principles of privacy and protection. So the best way to uphold those values is by making sure that the design is more inward looking than outward looking. Let's look at the third principle, which is the structure, honesty, and ritual. This third principle of structure, honesty, and ritual influences the Magini's construction process to be rhythmic and communal. In this process, they incorporate what they call zankwae, which are the pinnacles that you see on the rooftops. These pinnacles were originally built as permanent scaffolding points to allow builders to climb up for annual repairs, but over time they evolved into iconic symbols of strength. What I'm taking away from this is that you can start building and employing a value initially, but over time, it's also okay for that value to point as your change of view of the world also changes. So you can apply different interpretations to your building over a period of time. Maybe as you change, your people change, your community change, your experiences change, something like that. Now let's look at the role of the Magini in the community. I will categorize this segment into three parts: their social and political status, their role in maintaining the architecture, and finally passing down the building knowledge from one generation to the next. To fully understand the Magini's social and political role in the community, we must look past the terms like emirate and return to the Sutura, which is the indigenous Hausa system of governance. In this structure, the Magini were considered state officials, and their highest rank was referred to as the Saki Guinea, which also translates to the king of building. The Saki Guinea served as a chief engineer and advisor to the ruler, responsible of the city's defense through the maintenance of the ganua, which are the massive city walls. The Magini were also powerful hereditary professions, and I use the word hereditary because they were responsible for transferring the building skills knowledge from one generation of the Magini to the next. This was done in a rigorous and oral and practical journey that lasts between 3 to 7 years. This ensured that the building process was not just a gig, but a lifelong vocation. And the Magini were entrusted with the most sacred, sensitive structures, such as the great mosques and the royal audience chambers. The Magini were also in charge of the annual maintenance cycle of the architecture. They believe a building is never a finished static object. It is an organic entity that requires seasonal care. And they typically operate their maintenance cycle on a timeline dedicated to the Damina, which is the rainy season that is currently in this area, Niger and Nigeria, where the Hausa people currently reside. Once the rain ends, there was a new season that came that was called Kaka, and this is the harvest season. Since this season is considered the season of renewal, the Magini did two things. The first one was the post-rain assessment analysis, where immediately after the rains, the Magini inspects the walls for scarring or erosion. Where there was scarring or erosion that has happened, they used a natural polymer made from fermented locust bean pods called Makuba, and they apply the waterproof glaze to the exterior. This isn't just a maintenance process, but it's a ritual that returns the sheen and the strength to the home. So one of the most important roles that the Magini played during this cycle was the ability to also pull the people together in the community and mobilize their efforts. This whole process was typically called Gayya. It's done especially when major structures like a mosque or a city gate needed to be repaired. We've gone through the history of the Magini. We've also gone through the mindset and the philosophy of the Magini. And lastly, now we've just looked at the role of the Magini in the community. I'd love to know your key takeaways, not just for this segment, but also for this second part of this series. I think it's important for us to think about how you're going to be able to maintain your home even once you build it, and then explore the options of leveraging either, social capital versus financial capital. Are you able to maybe mobilize the community in your village or in the place that you live, maybe your family members, to be a part of this beautiful, maybe ceremonial process where annually or semi-annually you come and then you do the renewal process of renewing the mud walls, not just for you, but maybe for a few other people who've also decided to build with mud. I think this is a new concept of living, because then it fosters community and it takes us away from the mindset that we just have to live in privacy. I think building social capital is something extremely valuable, and you could either decide to go full on social capital, or you can have a healthy balance of social capital and also financial capital. Why not? These are ways, and we don't have to just necessarily do away with them. It's also, I think, important to be very intentional about passing down knowledge from family to family, because if you right now are very passionate about living sustainably, building an eco-friendly home, and building with mud, understanding how you can be one with the environment, and then you in a way don't have an opportunity to pass that down either to your family members, to your kids, or even just think of maybe collaborating with a school. I think that becomes a very huge missed opportunity. Then we don't get an opportunity or a real chance to pass down the knowledge. And I think this is what has been done in the past, where a lot of us now don't fully understand, or we do not know how to go back and take up our indigenous ways and do the one thing that we desire the most, which is to live sustainably or to build an eco-friendly home. So let me know what you think about this series. The next part that is coming up is, now we're going to start to dig into like the step-by-step process. For instance, how did the Magini scout the land? How did they source the land? I know the whole process of like getting land right now is very commercial, but we'll try to challenge the mindset that we have right now by looking at how the Magini looked at the whole land acquisition process, and take a thing or two from them and start to apply it in the way we live today and how we want to build. Until next time, guys, cheers.